And we can go ahead and get started. Hi, everyone, and welcome. My name is Steffany Bahamon. I am a co-lead for Abundant Housing Illinois, and I will be your facilitator for tonight's webinar. We have a great slew of people who have come to hear us talk today about single stair. As you can see, our agenda, we have a brief overview and introductions, and then we're going to get a little bit of information from Michael about what single stair means for buildings. Following that, we're going to hear from some folks in Austin, particularly Felicity. She's going to walk us through what it was like to legalize single stair in Austin. Alex Montero from Strongtown, Chicago will talk to us about Chicago's single stair journey, where we are up until now. And Ben Wolfenstein from Abundant Housing, Illinois is going to give us some call to actions. I'll wrap up with some Q&A and next steps. So these are the three fine folks who are joining us today. We have expertise from all over the United States, Seattle, Austin, and America's finest big city, Chicago, Illinois. And we'll have all of these folks give us a very brief walkthrough of some great topics revolving around single stair. Just as a brief reminder for everyone, single stair is a housing policy that allows homes to be built with just one point of egress given a certain size of the building, and it is a proven policy that helps quite a bit in creating family-sized units. So if you want more 3, 4 bedrooms in Chicago, this is going to be the policy that's for you.
Thank you to Abundant Housing Illinois for inviting me to speak about single stair. I spent a little time working abroad in Germany. After that, I founded Larch Lab, focusing on kind of better buildings here in the US, and I am currently the director of design and policy for Seattle Social Housing. So this building does not exist in Chicago. You guys probably know some building that's similar to this. Urban planners in the US will play these games to make our big, massive buildings look smaller. They'll mandate different materials. Maybe they'll require you to modulate the facade, push things in and out. This building ends up being largely studios and one bedrooms. It's really, really difficult to get small urban development to pencil in the US for a number of reasons. These really don't offer a high quality of life, but I think it's important to note that this building largely does not exist outside of the US or Canada. So instead, what you'll see in new development like this is a bunch of smaller buildings that compose a much larger block. These are a broad mix of housing types. You could have co-housing next to social housing, market rate housing, condos, right? So at the block level, you get this really kind of elegant mixing of diversity, both economically and socially, that really is missing in a lot of the development in the US. So I'll talk about kind of my approach to this, how my thinking really came around on single stair, some of the benefits, some of the issues around public health and climate that I think really make these for better buildings. We basically have three forms or three methods of reaching units in buildings, and it turns out that the way that we get to these units has pretty dramatic knock-on effects. The main one that we'll see in the US, this is the double-loaded corridor. This is required anytime you're taller than 3 stories or you have more than 4 units per floor. It's moderately efficient. It primarily induces smaller units, though, right? So it's really difficult to get large family-sized units, except on the corners. It's kind of inducing a lot of windowless bedrooms as well. Primarily, we put dense housing on like arterials, major highways. And so if you're on a loud street, you can't really get away from that noise if you're on the side of the building facing the street, right? So these really are hotels, right? We're designing our multifamily buildings to be more like hotels. And so it has really different qualitative effects versus kind of the status quo of development the world over. Single loaded corridor is actually more common in Switzerland and a number of other European countries. You get the ability to cross ventilate. You can have daylight on multiple sides. It's not as dense. It's harder to get more units than you would find in a double loaded corridor or a single stair. And so, for a number of reasons, we don't really see it utilized here. But the point access block, the single stair building, is really the workhorse of urban housing pretty much the world over. The idea is you've got a handful of units that are all around a single core, elevator, stair. These buildings tend to be more compact. They are incredibly efficient in terms of floor plate. They're much thinner floor plates than we see with double-loaded corridor buildings, and so there are more opportunities for grid space, community, and things of that nature. And the double-loaded corridor is really the status quo of pretty much all development in the U.S. We're kind of reaching the limits of it. On the bottom left, you can see a corridor that's a couple of units that are separated from the stair right there. So we actually already have conditions in our multifamily buildings that are more dangerous than you would find in single stair buildings. So you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 units that if there's a fire right next to that stair on the bottom left, they wouldn't have any exit to access whatsoever. Right. And so this compactness, what's really, really interesting about it is like in less floor area, we start to get the same number of people, maybe not the same number of units, although there are some ways to kind of play around with that, but we start to get the same number of people in less floor area. This in turn, I think, leads to potential cost savings, embodied carbon savings, right? And then, like I said, our buildings are thinner. And so there are more opportunities to kind of play around with other things on the site around the building. Our codes and our financing regimes have effectively eliminated small scale development in most of the US. And so we've really seen small buildings, under 30 apartments, really fall off a cliff, whereas buildings with more than 50 units are now the norm. This is completely outside of the norm for most of the world. In Germany, a fourplex has been the median building for almost 70 straight years. And when we're thinking about how places redevelop, right, the single stair allows small scale urban development, that fine grained development to happen over time. You don't need parcel assembly. So, like if you're a building owner, you can just sell your lot to one developer, or you could redevelop it yourself and do your small little building. And so you get like this more fine grained redevelopment instead of what we tend to see, which is one developer comes in and buys up most of the block or all of the block and then completely redevelops it. And you lose that fine grained nature. You lose all those businesses that really made such a great place to live. This is a study from that we did for Seattle when I was at Large Lab. Our conditions allow up to 6 stories. So the US baseline is 3 stories. Seattle allows up to 6 stories. We can do up to 4 units per floor. So 4 units per stair per core or per floor. We can do 2 of these conditions. So we can get moderately scaled buildings, right? So 24 to 48 unit buildings with these kinds of conditions. What I find really fascinating, though, is it allows us to start living in ways that you don't normally see in multifamily buildings. So the point access block allows you to have daylight on multiple sides of the building. It allows for cross ventilation. If you happen to be on a busy street, you can put all the bedrooms on the quiet side of the building, right? And so that when people are sleeping, they're kind of protected from that noise, and it's a much greater kind of sleeping environment than you would have as if you're directly on the street itself. Another aspect of this is our deep floor plates and the double loaded corridors induce these really, really large units. On the left, you see a 2-bedroom unit. It's a really deep floor plate, so we're just trying to cram in as much stuff as we can. We end up getting like 2 full suites, a kitchen that's not really near a window, lots of storage space. It's about 1,000 square feet. In Europe, that same building would be a moderate 3-bedroom unit with 2 bathrooms, and then a kitchen, living, dining oriented parallel to the facade, right, rather than perpendicular. And so all of these units, all of these rooms are getting much better daylight qualities. And so, like, here's another comparison, right? On the left, you've got a 3-bedroom unit in the US, really, really high cost. They only have windows on one side of the unit. If we're lucky, maybe you can be on the corner and have daylight on 2 sides, windows on 2 sides. But that's not really the case, right? The single stair building, the point access block, allows us to get better units. It also kind of induces larger unit sizes, right? So we get more family sized units. I can't even remember the last time I saw an apartment in Seattle that had 4 bedrooms. They're almost non existent, but they're really, really common in European housing. You get, none of your buildings would have windowless bedrooms, which we're seeing more and more of here on the West Coast. And so, like, there's these limitations around the number of units per floor. Developers still want to maximize the amount of built area that they can get, right? And so it kind of induces these larger and larger units than you would typically find in status quo development. And in Europe, this isn't just utilized for small scale development. For large scale development, they'll start to connect, they'll chain all of these single stair conditions. This is a large cooperative in Switzerland. It's actually 5. Each one of those yellow boxes is a stair core and an elevator core. So it's 5 single stair conditions that are all connected together. What's really fascinating to me is on the reentry corners. So that's like the inside corners of the building. Here in the US, you'd only have windows or daylight on that one wall where it's on the reentrance side. What single stair allows is the windows can go through to the opposite side, right? So those interior corner units actually have daylight on 2 and even 3 sides. It's just completely different way of thinking about housing than we typically see. And so there's this overarching question to how we design our buildings, right? Does fire burn differently in the US and Canada? Well, our codes seem to think it does. The rest of the world doesn't see things that way. And so we have these deep units. It's really like living in a bowling alley. You only have windows on one side, like I said, unless you're lucky enough to live on a corner. Is this a substitute for living in a detached house? Is this a substitute for living in a townhouse? I would say it's not. But like the typical unit layout in a single stair building for a family sized unit, right? Abundant daylight, lots of windows. It's a very different way of living. It's not like living in a single family house, but it does offer a lot of those qualities, right? The things that people want when they're looking for something like that, while still living and being in an urban environment. And for some reason, the Swiss regulations around buildings allow the Swiss cooperatives to have like the highest quality of life, the best design buildings that I've ever seen. So they're like really the gold standard for me right now and what we should be striving to achieve. And I have a lot of concerns about the future of buildings in the US. The International Building Code, which is our code for multifamily housing, is inducing really, really deep and darker units, lots of windowless bedrooms. There's a development underway here in Seattle. It's a 3 bedroom unit. This is the one on the right. That little red section right there, those are the only windows it has. It's 3 bedrooms, and none of the windows or none of the bedrooms have windows, right? So we're kind of trying to force in as much density as possible, as much housing as possible. But the way that we're doing it is, I would say, not really great in terms of livability or quality of life. And so some of these knock-on effects that I was talking about earlier, right? Like you can get a much better home, daylight on 3 sides. This is a Swiss single stair building on the left. This is a 3 bedroom unit in a double loaded corridor on the right. The 3 bedroom unit in the US has more doors. It's got fewer windows. It's got way more wall area, way more paint. It's a very different way of living in an urban environment. The Swiss building is really compact. All of the plumbing is much more compact. There are knock on effects related to that as well. And so there are, I think, extensive cost saving potential in single stair buildings when we start to think about all of these other effects, mechanical, plumbing, and so forth. And this is just a diagram kind of showing some of the compactness of the Swiss building on the left, and the European building on the right. What really stands out to me is just the limited amount of daylight that you have in the U.S. building, and this is pretty typical for large 2 and 3 bedroom units and multifamily housing in the U.S. Like I said, the knock-on effects related to single stair, I think, start to become really, really interesting with something like plumbing, where we can start to make all of our plumbing super compact. There are opportunities for significant savings in plumbing, also embodied carbon of our plumbing materials in this as well, that we really can't do because of how things are distributed in our typical double loaded corridor buildings. This is a 4 or 5 story single stair building in Switzerland. What I love about this is all of the plumbing is basically on one wall. That red square in the middle, it's 4 bedrooms, 2 showers in the plumbing core in the middle. You've got 2 showers or 2 bathrooms, one with the shower, one with the tub. It's got a storage room that has your laundry closet, and then it has your plumbing wall, right? Like that compactness is not possible in the way that we design kind of our typical status quo construction. And so I can't go into any building, a multifamily building in the US, without thinking about The Shining, right? There's something about the way that we design our housing, the way that we have to live in this housing because we don't know or we don't allow this radically different way of living. This image always comes to mind. And so that is all I have. I did write Building for People. If you guys are interested in writing or learning more about single stair, eco districts, how carbon and livability and better places can all come together. This is really kind of been the effort of my work the last couple of years.
All right, thank you so much for your presentation, Mike. I think that the exact same details whenever I walk into a Michael. Yeah, let's get some claps in the chat for Mike. Thank you, Michael, for putting that reaction there. I think this similarly whenever I walk into a building in Europe, I walk and see a single stair, and I'm like, would be nice if we could have that here. Talking about having that here, if you have any questions for Mike, please drop it in the chat. We are now actually going to pass the mic over to Felicity.
Well, as we're waiting for the slides to come up, I'm delighted to be here. My name is Felicity Maxwell. I'm the Executive Director of Texans for Housing, and I work in housing at the state and local level. I'm also what's an AURA board member. So AURA in Austin is basically our version of Abundant Housing Illinois. We do a lot of work on local land use regulations and transportation issues. And we basically undertook the effort to get single stair passed in Austin starting in 2024. So it was a long campaign, but we came out of it in a really great place. And I'm happy to tell you both what happened in Austin and then what the kind of knock-on effect was at the state level. But we'll start with Austin. And I think the slide should be coming up here in a minute. But just to give you a sense of where this all started from is because of great folks like Mike, we actually had sort of been stair-pilled, so to speak. We had a group of urbanists like yourselves, as well as kind of architects and other individuals in Austin who are interested in having single stair become part of our technical building codes. And essentially, Austin is on a technical building code cycle. So as Mike mentioned earlier, there is the IBC, the IRC, a variety of technical building codes. every city kind of does the updates in a different way or a slightly different cycle. Ours was a 3-year cycle. And so we knew starting in 2024 that basically those codes were up for revision. And what happens in most cases is it basically takes a year for your local city staff to look at those codes, sort of figure out what they're going to change and what maybe new adoptions they're going to put in. And then they go through a community engagement process, stakeholder process. And then at the end of the year, usually towards September or October, they adopt those new code updates and they will go into effect at some later point in time. So basically the start of 2024, we knew was our window of opportunity to see if we could get a local code amendment adopted regarding single stair. And so that was sort of the goal of our initial campaign work in Austin. As I mentioned, we had a group of folks who were interested in this, but really the key thing happens were two pieces. Oh yeah, well, we can start with this. I'll go back to the single stair. This is basically my organization. We work at the state level. We passed a bunch of great housing reforms last year in Texas. Happy to talk more about those in a second. So then we're going to talk about single stair. So essentially, we had this opportunity to get single stair passed through our technical code update. Two key things that I mentioned to some of your other team, some of the folks who are interested in this. Basically, we knew what the timing was of our code updates, and we got a specific council member excited about this. And that council member is a gentleman named Chito Vela. He represents one of the districts in Austin that is slightly urban. So it's kind of not our most urban district, but probably adjacent to that. And essentially, he's a big urbanist. He's always been a strong supporter of Aura locally and the work that we're interested in. And so was really eager when we brought this idea to him to say, yes, let's see if we can get this technical code amendment added to this next round of code revisions. So essentially, the way the technical building codes usually work is that you actually, you can go to the next one, that's fine too. So basically, we really focused on exactly what Mike was just talking about, the benefits of single stair, how they allowed for more family-sized units, how they were basically great infill. And as you may know, Austin's had this huge building boom over the last kind of 5 years in particular, post-COVID. But a lot of that has been what we call Texas donuts, or the sort of terrible double-loaded corridors that Mike was talking about earlier. And so we were really selling this as an option to do more infill development, particularly with odd parcels or places where a larger land assembly just wasn't possible. And so a lot of what Mike was discussing as like opportunities with single stair, that's why we suggested that this would be a great local code amendment. So essentially what we did was we worked with our council member, Chito Vela, and he brought forward an item from council, what we call an IFC, and said, here's what we want to see in a single stair amendment from our planning department, and specifically our development services, who manages all of our technical code. And the reason I recommend that is like kind of a good first step is because it gave very specific direction. We didn't get into this as much when we were just talking about what single stair buildings look like, but there are key places where you're going to run into some resistance. The number one, which if you ever talk to anybody who's working single stair advocacy, it's the fire department. Because essentially part of the reason we have the rules we have today in the US is that fire departments got extremely concerned about taller single stair buildings, lack of a double corridor, like lack of two access points. So that's why we call it a point access block, is like there's only one access versus the dual access. And so basically over time, fire code has really prevented us from building these single stair buildings. And that has been reflected in the technical building codes that exist in a lot of cities. So when you go to change those codes, the first person they're going to call is their fire department, and the fire department is usually either going to hang up or say no. So you really have to be in a position where you know what you want in your local code amendment. You have talked to fire folks and sort of help them understand why this is a good idea, and that you have someone with some political strength, I will say honestly, to sort of navigate that complexity. Because as you all probably know, in most big cities, fire departments are quite powerful politically, and or they have the ability to kill things or sort of water them down. And again, if you talk to folks who work in single stair advocacy, that's consistently what we've seen. Good versions of this code that get adopted, really, they found a way to compromise with their fire departments, where they got their fire folks on board. Places where we've really seen it like kind of turn into a study or not really move forward or sort of get stalled out, that's where those fire departments have really just resisted any sort of change. Thankfully, in Austin, the gentleman who I mentioned, Councilmember Chito Vela, he was really good at working with our fire department. But this is where y'all are in for a little bit of a ride. It took us 18 months. So when I mentioned we started in January of 2024, we did not actually pass single stair, the final code revisions, until March of 2025. So it was basically over a year process. And a lot of that was back and forth between basically once we had that baseline resolution of here's what we want to see, we went to the development services group. the fire department and went through, I literally round after round after round of revisions. And a lot of what that comes down to is what type of safety features they're going to ask you to put in addition to single stair, because the single stair buildings themselves are considered unsafe in many cases by fire departments. So they're going to ask you for additional regulations. And that can be things like pressurization. It can be things like a certain distance from the furthest corner of the building on the floor plate to the actual floor, to the actual exit. It could be a wider stairwell. All of these things are kind of come with trade-offs. We tried to keep the focus on, we want these types of buildings. We're happy to do as much safety work as possible, but they have to be reasonable so that the buildings can still be built. And again, because we had the strong support of someone who really believed in this as a concept of housing, he was very happy to push back when there was kind of an unrealistic demand from a fire department request. So for example, one of the ones I just mentioned, a very wide staircase is something they'll often ask for. Well, then you run into other parts of the building code where that essentially requires, if you think of like a library or museum, you have to have that center pole running down the middle because the stairwell is so wide that it's not safe for people, or under our building code, it's not considered safe for folks to walk up and down those staircases without that middle pole. Well, the middle pole and the size of that basically eats up all the extra space and savings that Mike so eloquently talked about earlier. So essentially, when you go to a wider staircase, you're kind of killing the development opportunity, A, and B, it's not necessarily making anything safer because you have wide staircases that may not be appropriate for that sort of building. Because as you think about it, we usually use those for larger crowded spaces like a museum or a library. So there's these things that you'll get asked about in terms of safety features. There's a kind of standardized set now, which we basically adopted in Austin and we brought to the state. And I think most of ours felt very reasonable. Some things are more important to other fire departments, for example, pressurized stairways, additional so I think it's in Canada, they require a smoke exit at the top of their staircase. So it's like kind of like a window at the top where smoke can be, exit. So there's different sort of code things that you may end up having to add into your single stair to get it approved. But the idea is exactly this: create a balance between making sure these can at least be built and what the fire department can live with. In Austin, that took a long time to negotiate, a long time. But by the time March came around, we'd all come to something everyone could agree to. For the most part, it was put forward. I will still say our fire department came up and testified against it and tried to convince several of our council members to actually vote against it. Did not work, but that was like a last ditch effort on their part. And so we did consistently have to kind of push back against this narrative that what we were trying to create were infill buildings that were unsafe. We knew that that wasn't the case. And I would actually say we're in a stronger position today than we even were when we did this work, because there have been subsequent reports, and I'll drop the links in there, about from the Pew, for example. Their fire safety report is phenomenal. There's a great podcast that I highly recommend everyone listens to that basically just really outlines how much safer these buildings are in terms of versus multifamily double loaded corridors. So it's not even that these buildings are less safe. These are actually safer buildings. We just don't allow them to be built. And that's kind of the fundamental point you should be saying to your fire department is you're not creating a new fire hazard in your city. You're actually creating a setup where people are safer in their buildings because they're smaller. It's easier to get out. There's less likelihood of smoke damage or inhalation. They're actually easier to navigate for firefighters. But point being is all of that is hard, quite honestly, for fire departments in particular to understand, but even building safety officials, because they haven't seen these buildings in action. They're not used to them seeing them being coming in and out. And that's despite these buildings existing in almost every city, because almost every city did allow them at some point. So they do exist. I know they exist in Chicago, but if you ask a firefighter, they'll be like, oh no, we need 2 points of access to fight a fire. And you're like, well, you go into buildings all the time that don't. So how does that work? But it's just this really rethinking, how can you allow more of that building and let them still feel like they can do their job? And do it in a way where you're not going to get run over because of political requirements, et cetera, et cetera. So that's sort of the story of what happened in Austin. We passed it in Austin in March. The funny timing about all of this was that was the exact same time our Texas state legislature was meeting. And literally the last day you can file a bill in the state of Texas is March 14th. We literally filed a bill on single stair using the Austin model on the very last day. We had 2 great co-sponsors, one of whom was James Talrico, who you may have heard of. He's running for Texas State Senate, or I should say, yes, sir, Senate in Texas. And he loves talking about single stair. He was our actual champion on the House side. He's a House representative, and he did a great job explaining this bill. So literally between March 14th And then basically I think it was May 15th when we passed it through both houses in the Texas legislature. We essentially then had a model code for Texas that now states can opt into. So some of the work that we did locally, we basically said, hey, you don't have to redo all of our work. You can just basically use this as a model and adopt it automatically. So that was really the goal of that, was to take all the work we had done in Austin and give it as an opportunity to other people who wanted single stair across the state of Texas so that they wouldn't have to go through that same process. So that's sort of the summary of where we started and where we ended up in Austin and Texas. And I'm happy to answer any questions about Texans for Housing, Aura, and the work we did. And I have some links that I'm going to put in the chat now that you've heard me give my whole spiel. But hopefully that really helps you guys understand what happened to us and how we got to where we were going with single stair in Texas.
Felicity, there are two questions in the chat that I'm just going to vocalize real quick and you can
Yeah, go
answer
ahead.
them. So one of them from Michael: in Texas, was single stair a bipartisan initiative at the state level?
Yes, absolutely. I like to tell a funny joke about this because it's just tech classes, Texas politics. Some of you may know that there's this International Code Council. That's what actually puts together all of the work on this. Sets these standards. We went into a Texas senator's office who was like, well, why are we listening to Brussels bureaucrats from Brussels tell us how we build our buildings in Texas? And I didn't have the heart to tell him the ICC does not actually refer to people who live overseas in Belgium or anywhere else. It's actually an American group, but whatever, it worked because then they were, of course, we had to deregulate this and allow Texans to figure out their own way of building. So that kind of narrative works really well in a conservative state, quite honestly, that's very deregulatory. So they love this concept and it passed. It was actually one of the few bills that passed last session with both, with two Democratic co-sponsors, one of which was James Talrico, the other was Nathan Johnson. So essentially, even though it was two Democrats running that bill, everyone supported it and thought it was a good idea.
All right, thank you so much for that overview. And that is indeed an incredibly Texas story. That was quite funny. Secondly, another question, which you also answered a little bit earlier, but just to make sure we cover our bases here. How did Austin City Council work through the Austin's fire department concerns when the single stair ordinance passed there?
Yes, so I'm not exactly sure how you all do this, but the way it works for our council is we have what's called a subquorum. So around any particular issues, you'll have a group of council members who are really interested in that issue, and they meet regularly to talk about this. The lead council member on that, of course, was our point person, Chito Vela, as I mentioned. But essentially, there were 3 or 4 staff members, other staffers from other offices who also worked on this, and that's how we got to that kind of compromise. I will also say it helped tremendously that the mayor's staff was in support of this. They thought it was kind of a crazy urbanist idea, but I think they are always very pro-housing generally, which has been nice. So even though they didn't get into the weeds on it, they were monitoring what was happening so that when it came to the dais and the kind of vote was ready, we had pretty much broad support. There was one individual who decided to vote against it, mostly because you always have to have at least one NIMBY on your city council, I think, right? Anyway, point being is that having a course group of stakeholders worked through all of those issues and had consistent meetings with our fire department and advocates. So it was sort of a tri-party negotiation that went over those 6-10 months.
I appreciate that so much. Thank you, Felicity. Thank you for your work in Austin. And thank you, of course, for taking the time to talk to us today. There are some questions.
Happy to be here. Yes, I'll answer them right now.
Yeah, go ahead and answer those questions in the chat when you get the time. I do want to make sure we have enough time for our Chicago speakers to speak. So I'm going to pass the mic over to Alex Montero, who is the board chair of Strongtown Chicago. He's going to talk about what Strongtown Chicago is and how we're attempting to pass single stair reform here in Chicago. So Alex, whenever you're ready, go ahead and take it away.
Hey everyone, glad to be here talking to you all today. And I appreciate the insights from both Mike and Felicity. Felicity, we're basically trying to do what you accomplished in Austin here in Chicago. And as you were saying, some of the challenges that you went through, the negotiations with especially the fire department, no matter how much you negotiate, their position is this is going to be a bad thing and they're going to try to stop it. We've already seen some similar things here in Chicago, some similar concerns and some similar obstacles. The good news is here, we do have a contingent of aldermen, which are city council members, that are really interested in this. And they're really interested in this for a lot of the reasons that Mike gave up front, of building more family-friendly units, doing more infill that doesn't require massive lot consolidation and knocking down parts of neighborhoods all at a time. And so there's some really political will behind this. It's just a matter of getting it right and taking the lessons from the cities that have done this best so far. What we've been doing is working with, thankfully in Chicago, one of our aldermen, Matt Martin, for the 47th Ward, he submitted a single stair ordinance back in May of 2025. It was introduced in committee. Very quickly, the fire department gave active resistance to it, trying to get it not to leave committee. And since then, it had kind of festered a little bit. We're at an interesting moment right now where there is both a state level single stair legislation in play as part of a larger package of housing reforms, and also this ordinance potentially getting modified to take some of the lessons from other cities that have successfully done single stair to become something that could pass in Chicago City Council. And various housing groups in Chicago and in Illinois are pushing on both of those things at the same time. And there's a couple of reasons for that. Number one, we don't know which one will work out. Politics is fickle, and it's not always intuitive which effort is going to succeed. But second is that even if the state effort succeeds, this is going to have to be codified in the code in some way. And so being able to get ahead of that and say, this is language that fits into the rest of the code that makes it really clear what you're supposed to do for requirements and standards and how it fits into other pieces and exceptions, really makes it so that this doesn't become a procedural fight that lasts for another couple of years, even if nominally at the state level this passes. Some of the pictures you see in there, our volunteers, Strong Town Chicago is an all volunteer organization. All of us have other day jobs, and we're all just really, really passionate about the places we inhabit and the health of our city. And some of our volunteers have access to 3D printers and are good at modeling. So those two are a couple of models that we took to one of our meetings with the Chicago Fire Department to talk about single stair and their concerns and some of those potential safety devices and remediations that they consider important. And it really helped the conversation. While we were talking with the fire chief, who was telling us all the reasons this was a bad idea, he was actually pointing at different parts of the building of where they would do a fire attack and those kinds of things. So these kinds of aids, I think, help have those conversations. And even when you're dealing with skeptics, make it more of a productive conversation than a hypothetical one. We have a draft ordinance that we've been working with a couple of aides of different staff in City Hall and some architects to sanity check that things behave the way that we expect them to. And we've taken inspiration from some other cities like Austin that have made these changes and from other cities that have had versions of single stair longer, Seattle in particular, which has been very good about doing this in narrow lots, similar to what Chicago has for infill. So we're moving right now into the public engagement phase. We expect that in the next few months, a revised ordinance may actually be on the table and made public for folks, for different community groups to engage and react and say how this would help the challenges in their different parts of the neighborhood and the benefits that we've already talked about, and getting people to come out and officially say they support it and the reasons they do. And so the goal is to pass a single stair ordinance for Chicago in 2025. That's what we're pushing for. And like Austin, we'll see how long it takes, but we're all fully committed to making this happen. And there's a couple of call to actions towards the end, which I'll let Josh and after a couple of our speakers say, but these are the two specific to Strong Town Chicago and for the local effort and the statewide effort tied to build. So for Chicago specifically, there's a single stair interest form for volunteers. If you're seeing this and you're like, this sounds great, this sounds like it would make a big difference here. I believe in this. I want to help out. What can I do? That QR code, that's also hyperlinked in the slides if those go out after, will take you to a Google form. You just fill out your name, your email, whether you're in a couple of the communication platforms that we use at Strong Town Chicago and Abundant Housing Illinois, which we're partnering with on this. And we can get you added, plug you in. You can also indicate the kinds of ways that you want to help to volunteer, whether it's helping to write things, helping to reach out to people in city council, to other orgs, those kinds of things. And then on a statewide effort, there is currently a letter campaign in support of BUILD, which is the larger package of statewide reforms for housing. It includes single stair. It also includes things like fourplexes and eightplexes by right under certain conditions, and changes to permitting requirements and standards to expedite some of those things. So if you scan that QR code, that will take you to that letter writing campaign to support the statewide effort. I'd encourage you to do both of those things, reach out and plug in locally. Like I said, we're all volunteers here, and I'm at a stage right now where I had heard about this maybe a year or two ago. But at this point, I'm by no means an expert. I'm not an architect, but I know way more about stairs and staircases than I thought I ever would in my entire life. And it's been very cool to connect with really knowledgeable people and figure out how we get this and how we bring it to Chicago. So I encourage you to come join us and help us out in this.
All right, Alex, thank you so much for that overview. I always appreciate you and your work at Strongtown Chicago and all the great things that Strongtowns does over there. I see some claps in the chat. Please feel free to drop more claps in the chat. Alex has been working really hard on this, and so have all the folks over at Strongtown Chicago and at Abundant Housing. I do want to pass it over just before we wrap things up and finish with our call to action to Ben Wolfenstein, who is the State Policy Director, or rather Director of State Policy for YIMBY, Illinois, and a co-lead of Abundant Housing Illinois to talk about single stair at the state level. So Ben, if you're ready, go ahead and take it away.
Yeah, hi everybody. I'm the Director of State Policy at YIMBY, Illinois, and like Steffany said, a co-lead at Abundant Housing Illinois for a long time. But he really covered most of it. As you may know, the governor has the build plan, which includes, as part of it, single stair. In the House, it's being carried by Representative Buckner. It's an omnibus bill, HB 5626. In the Senate, it's being carried by Senator Feigenholtz, whose office is on this call, and that is SB 4061. It's very similar to the city ordinance. Max 6 stories, 4 units per floor, lots of safety, fire safety requirements. But that second QR code on your screen sends you to the letter campaign. We do these letter campaigns every session when we're advocating for our bills. They can have a really big impact. We know last year we were able to get 2 bills called in committee because of one of these letter campaigns. And so the last time I checked, which was a couple hours ago, we had over 600 letters sent. That number has probably shot up since then. If you haven't filled out or sent a letter yet, send a letter. Of course, making a phone call is even more effective. Also, share this with your family and friends if they live in Illinois. It's really easy. It takes only about 2 minutes to fill this out, and we've already written the letter for you. And so you can tell your friends that and your neighbors that. But this is a really exciting time, and we're attacking it from multiple angles, which, kind of like Felicity said, is a really good way to do it, because if one kind of fails, you have this kind of fail safe of the other ordinance or the other piece of legislation moving forward. That's all I got. Just letter campaign. That's what we're going to be pushing for the next couple months. Oh, and I do want to mention for Abundant Housing Illinois members, we have a lobby day on April 15th, where we will be going down to Springfield. Your train tickets will be paid, and we will be getting you food. That's one of the most effective and fun days we have as an organization. And we can go, talk to legislators and, maybe bring them models and show them why single stair and all this other stuff is something that they should support.
All right, thank you so much for that overview, Ben. Appreciate getting the state lot-wide overview. And again, do remember that Ben is paid. The rest of us just do this for free as our hobby. He's the lucky one. So where are we, folks? We've got 2 pushes. We've got statewide work on single stair, and we've got citywide work on single stair. Both of these are important. You have the form already in the chat if you are interested in working on this citywide. We're mainly talking about citywide right now. After you fill out that form, we recommend you join the respective Slacks of both Abundant Housing Illinois and Strongtown Chicago. So for Abundant Housing Illinois, you want to join the Codes channel, and for Strongtown Chicago, you want to join the Single Stair channel. So once again, thanks everyone for coming and talking about single stair. It's great to get some feedback from folks in Seattle and from folks in Austin. Please go ahead and join the Slack. For those of you who are not Abundant Housing Illinois members yet, filling out those letters for build does count as volunteering, so you can request to join as a volunteer from our website afterwards. With that being said, we are going to wrap up this presentation portion of this right now. Thank you, everybody.